Welcome to the AMATIC 2017 webinar series. Today, we are so pleased to have Lara Cleveland here to talk about IPUMS, data, it's real world for teaching. And I wanted to let you know that this presentation is sponsored by the Joint Committee of AMATIC and the American Statistical Association, or ASA. The American Mathematical Association of Two-Year Colleges has several core values, and one of them is professional development. And really, this is why we are all here today for this webinar. One of our core values is to building expertise and exhibiting leadership in the teaching and learning of mathematics, enhancing personal growth, and improving teaching and methods and effectiveness as a personally initiated lifelong responsibility. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend this hour with us today and working on that mission of AMATIC. If you need more information, please see amatic.org. Please note that the views expressed by the presenter are not necessarily the views of AMATIC. Commercial products mentioned by the presenters are not endorsed by AMATIC. I wanted to let you know that McGraw-Hill is proud to sponsor our webinar series this year. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually have Lara introduce herself to you. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Lara, and she's going to go ahead and switch to her slides right now.
Hey, hello, my name is Lara Cleveland, and I'm a research scientist at the Minnesota Population Center. The center is a part of the University of Minnesota. So as a researcher, I manage a census data integration and dissemination project. My project is primarily focused on international censuses, but for the sake of teaching some introductory college level classes, I'm gonna present today looking at some of the USA census data that we have. So I will go ahead as soon as I find my arrow here and tell you a little bit about the Minnesota Population Center, about the data that we have, which is to hopefully expose you to another source of interesting data about the people in your classes. Hopefully it would be interesting to them to use in their exercises or work that you do. As I mentioned, we'll take a look at the USA Census data available in the IPUMS, and we'll have a few pauses for questions as we go along. But first, we do have a couple polls so I can kind of gauge what you all do. So the first one is just a question about what your stats class focus is. I assume you're preparing students for all kinds of professions, but I'm curious as to which ones, or whether you teach statistics primarily as a mathematics class. So I guess we'll launch that poll and see what people say.
Okay, so you should see the poll up on the screen. You can select more than one, so if more than one falls into your area, please do that. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds. About half of you have voted so far. Okay, we almost have everybody voted so far, just about. I keep forgetting that Lara and I don't vote, so we're almost to the top there. Let me go ahead and share those results with you. It looks like 78% are mostly or primarily doing this as a mathematics course, or statistics, and then you've got a smattering for the other ones. The biostatics 11%, business applications 33%, social science applications 44%, and preparation for other sciences you've got 44%.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. And then one more question about whether you've ever heard of IPUMS, just aware of it, you've looked around a little bit, or whether you've actually downloaded data from any of the IPUMS websites.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. Go ahead and make your choice. Got about over half the people have voted early. Let me just give you a few more seconds. Well, I think the right people are here today, Lara, because 89% of us know it's the first exposure today, but there's 11% that have been aware of it, but nobody has browsed the site or downloaded data.
Okay, well, this will be a fairly brief introduction. There's a lot to cover, but I hope that it overcomes some barriers and that you'll be a little more familiar and even able to use the site, perhaps. Great, thank you so much for that. Okay, a little bit about the Minnesota Population Center. It started out as a small project, a demographic historian, actually, quantitative historian, who wanted to use historical US censuses in his research. And he did a lot of work cleaning them up, coding a few of them so that the codes would be consistent across the different historical censuses, and got this brilliant idea that this work could be useful to others. Wrote his first grant, and the rest is history. It became very well used, increased the amount of cross-temporal historical research going on, and we've gotten many grants since then, primarily from the National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation, to do more of this work to make data more easily accessible for researchers and teachers. So the center is like many population centers in that it is a hub for interdisciplinary population and demographic research. There's a demographic training curriculum, but it's quite different from most population centers in that we also have this wing that builds these data tools and dissemination systems for researchers and educators to access real-world microdata. So that's the center. It's now home to several data projects. I'm sorry that these are quite small. I will just point out that the ones on the left side here are projects to disseminate census data, international samples of censuses from more than 80 countries now, US census data. Current Population Center also has a number of modules on employment and other topics, and some historic European data. On the right-hand side, there are also health survey projects. That's the second and the fourth one here. Geographic summary data, and some new time use data. So we're making a lot of data available. Some of these are more or less public already, but high barriers to access, and that's what we try to solve. So all of these are accessible from IPUMS.org. If you learn one microdata system, they all look very similar. So we're going to take a look at the USA site in a few minutes on the live system. So IPUMS, odd name. Everyone wants to call it IPUMS since the advent of the iPod. Here's what it stands for by way of explaining kind of what it is. So it stands for integrated, which means both harmonized codes across variables or survey census questions, as well as the fact that we bring these data sets together and you can access pre-pooled data sets. We also do a lot of work to make documentation more accessible. Public use means it's free of charge, anonymized downloadable data files, microdata, individual level records, usually organized into households, and it contains many points in time. So it's not necessarily longitudinal, although there are a few samples that have that component where people are linked across time, but you do have several slices of data across time. That's IPUMS. And I debated whether to take out this slide that explains the difference between summary data and microdata. I figure statisticians know about that, but I include it just to emphasize the fact that this really is a project to disseminate individual level records, so samples with full information about individuals. Also to remind me to emphasize that the difference here is that in the summary data, You get your pre-made aggregate tables, aggregate characteristics, and often you can get them at a very low geographic level. Tables are often made at small area levels, but you don't have much flexibility to do your own analysis with summary data. Microdata, on the other hand, includes the full range of responses, but where it really suffers in suppression, you see at the bottom there, is that for confidentiality reasons, we limit, or the Census Bureaus limit, the geographic detail and some item level suppression or truncation of top and bottom codes, some collapsing of categories when you have small cells. So we are delivering primarily microdata files, and users can make a custom extract. Example of summary data. Data from the IPUMS are individual level records. Variables are coded, so everything is numeric. And almost all of the files in the IPUMS are organized into households. So you have individuals, but you also can ascertain information about household structure and information about other people who live with an individual. So that's just denoted here. So given that this microdata is available, I am curious the extent to which microdata is useful in your classroom. So first of all, just asking, kind of answer the most advanced, perhaps, thing your students do. In what way do your students use or interact with data for your course or courses? Are they doing exercises using a calculator? Do they do some, number 2, manipulation in Excel or equivalent spreadsheet type application? Or are they sometimes analyzing data files using a statistical software package?
Okay, so you should see the poll there now. Should be able to answer. I've got about half of the participants have responded so far. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. Just quick, commit to the best one that describes your situation. We're not keeping score, I promise. Okay, it looks like everybody has voted who's going to. I'm going to go ahead and share those results. You've got about 5% that are using calculators only. 38% are in the middle category there, that analyzing small data files with a calculator or an Excel or some kind of equivalent. And then the biggest number is using statistical software, 57% you've got there.
Okay, great, thank you, that's useful. Well, I hope we can get you some data then. In the census files, here are a few of the topics that are generally available. There's more information than this, but this is just to kind of give you an overview. A lot of information, demographic, obviously. The American Community Survey, which is the one we're going to talk about today, collects quite a bit of information about occupation. There is some income information, good education information, race and ethnic origin questions, and then the household features, which include a few things about the size of the home. It also includes information about renting or owning, includes information about the value of the house or the rent paid or the mortgage payment. So quite a bit of stuff there to work with. Some geographic information as well, just not very small areas. You can't look at your own little census tract or even county unless it's a real big one. And then I want to talk a little bit about the work we do to harmonize variables. So one of the challenges in working with multiple files is that things come in different coding systems, different data structures, and the work we do is to overcome that. So this is an example from international censuses, but I think it illustrates the idea pretty well. If you get data from 3 different files, you might get different categorizations, you'll get different values on similar categories. And what we do is almost exactly this. Put them all in a metadata-driven system of input. And we align things that are similar and assign similar concepts a single code across all the data files. So this is great for cross-temporal research. As you're starting out, you might just want one file and this won't be useful to you. But if you want to take, you know, a 2005 and a 2010 and a 2015, you can track change over time as well. So another thing we do commonly, and this is partly so that when you see it on the website, it doesn't make you afraid, is that we create a composite coding systems to preserve detail. So all of these areas, if you can see the green shading, are representing some kind of in a union or marriage concept, but different countries in this case have paid attention to different details. So we've tried to preserve that detail in trailing digits. So the 10s and the 20s here are married formally versus consensual union. The third digit here is recording this other additional detail. Divorced gets a couple codes based on whether divorced and separated are combined or split, and widowed. But what the user gets, what you can download, is a single code where everything is consistent across these samples in the detailed version or the concise comparable version across samples. This is too much for today. I'm going to skip this slide. And then I'm going to talk about our delivery system. So we have these variables, demographic characteristics like sex, marital status, occupation. We have the microdata files where these variables are defined. And if you're only interested in marital status and home ownership, you might only need that part of the data. And when you come to our website, you can look at the documentation, you can preview the codes and labels, and you can decide which things are of interest to you and request those variables, and our system will write a customized extract for you. It will even pool data files, so if you wanted a few different files, you pick which ones you want, you select the variables, and they all get written into a data file. There's your first one. Here's the second one. And when you come back to the site after having submitted your request, less than an hour, maybe at maximum a couple hours later, you'll get an email that your data file is ready to go, and you can download that microdata with syntax files to read it into a stats package, which we'll take a look at on the website. So we're going to jump in there now, and that is where I will be able to show you how you register for access, simple process. We'll browse for some variables, take a look at what the documentation looks like. What I've shown you here doesn't reveal the comprehensive documentation that's available. And that's the part that really I think is a little bit of the barrier, but I think once you see it once or twice, it will all make sense, hopefully. You can let me know. We'll walk through making an extract, requesting a pooled data file, and then hopefully we'll have time to take a look at the online data analysis system, because you might be able to make some tables for your classes and when you want to do exercises where you're not requiring students to use a statistical package. So I think my next slide is a thank you slide, but we're not leaving yet. Instead, I'm going to jump over to the website. And maybe we take questions here if people have. I went through that fairly quickly.
Sure. So the one question that came up when you were, just before you told us what IPUMS stood for, it was, what does it stand for? So you already answered that one. One of the questions was for me, and that is the recording available later? Because people are interested, they want to see this again. And the answer is yes, and I do do talk about that at the end of the webinar. Then there's another question, which I think maybe it was supposed to be in the chat box. I'm not sure, because it was currently using the calculator, but this person wants to expand to Excel and maybe use some other stats packages. So I think this person's in the right webinar.
Okay.
And then another question just came in. It is, can you give us some examples of how teachers have used data in the classes? I'm primarily interested in university level basic statistics class.
Yes and no. I'm a trained sociologist. I work with historians and other demographers, economists. A graduate student economist is the modal user of these data at the moment. But we have been reaching out a little more to the statistical community recently. So we do know of several uses of the data in social science and econ classes. We don't know as much about, and we don't know if as many statistical educators are using these data. So we have been at a few meetings recently and been talking to them about how they use data. So I don't have a lot of curricular materials available for you now, but I have in my notes at the end to say that over this summer, we are having a few graduate students work with us to help develop some more curriculum, especially in statistics, but also in our other disciplines that we serve. So I can give you a few verbal tips, but this summer, I hope you will come back and visit our site because we hope to be putting up more and more curriculum examples. As we're looking at the website, and I'll switch over to that now, I will also show you where we have a few exercises that I think might give you a little flavor of some things you could carry into the classroom. So I wish I had a lot more curricula today for you. Maybe in a few years we'll come back with tons of it. Okay, so here we are. This is from IPUMS.org. You can get to all of the projects. From USA.IPUMS.org, you can get to the US Census and American Community Survey data. So that's where we are here. Before we jump into finding data, I want to point out a couple things. One is the IPUMS registration. You can browse the whole site. You can get information about codes, labels, basic unweighted frequencies without registering. But if you want to download data or use the tabulation system, you have to be registered. If we view the application form here, it's some basic contact information. It's useful to know what you're teaching. There is one area for a general research statement. Something that said, I teach statistics and I'm looking for data to use in the classroom would be plenty sufficient here. And then you agree that to limited redistribution rights and that you'll cite the data properly in any resulting publications and submit. And then you have access to the data. One of our health surveys, the international data, the registration is a little bit more significant because we've actually agreed to take a look at all those registrations. This one is to make sure that we have information about who's using the data so that we can provide that to our grant funders and go back and keep this resource coming. So registration, fairly simple. Two other things I wanted to point out. Overall, information about the samples can be found here in this documentation, samples. Again, looks a little intimidating. There's data here all the way from 1850 census files to the present American Community Survey right here, which is what we're going to be looking at. The American Community Survey is fielded by the Census Bureau. They don't like us to call it a replacement for the long-form census, but in effect, it's a very similar survey instrument that used to be fielded as the long form of the census, but they now have a staff and do this as a running survey every year. So it asks more detailed information than you find on a typical census questionnaire. Let's see, that was samples. User's guide. You'll want to flag this for yourself if you're interested, because some of these tutorials from this tutorial link could be really useful. They go in a little more depth than I am today. They're specifically targeted at walking you through how to use the system, how to download data, how to open the file, and even some exercises that might be relevant to your classroom use. So that's important. But if we want to jump into all the documentation that's available here, we'll go either to Browse and Select or to this big Select Data at the top. And this is kind of our home page for data browsing. It looks a little intimidating, but once we go through it, I don't think it will be so bad. So you have to do a little bit of shift in your thinking from thinking about going to just get a data set and download the whole thing, loading it on your machine, and then combing through the booklet or the code book or whatever comes with it, to more of a variable-centered approach. So everything on the website is organized around topic, question, variable, that kind of thing. Organized by household thematic groups, things like geography, dwelling characteristics, appliances of the household, or person thematic groups, demographic, age, sex, marital status, race, work, education, those kinds of topics. Once we jump into these topics, there are 2 layers of documentation. If you know variable names, you can do an A to Z search. The search feature works pretty well, but on the first few visits, it's worth jumping around topics here. So if I go take a look at what's available geographically in these data files, I'm at the first level of browsing, which gives us a variable name and label. So I have something like a census region. Those are broad areas of the country. I have 2 different coding systems for state. In case you're bringing in to attach other data here, you might be wanting to link on an ICPSR code or a FIPS code. County, don't be deceived, this is only big counties. So we're going to stick with state today. If you go across here, you see the years at the top. The X's just indicate that this variable is available in each of those data sets. So if my students only really care about recent years since they've been alive and maybe want to look at something in their state, once we jump into the second level of variable information, we have a lot more detail. We have a description of what this variable represents. We have a list of codes and their labels. So here we're looking at states. We can see a case count view. This is a household level variable. So what we're seeing here is an unweighted count of households. Eventually, we're going to try to show the fully weighted information for these variables. We've written some custom documentation about how comparable states are across time. If you're just looking at recent US, you're in pretty good shape, but as you can imagine, if you're going all the way back to the 1850s, some things weren't states yet. Here we have a couple special files that don't include all the states. But if you're looking at recent US, you're pretty comparable at the state level. Now, if this browsing is a little unwieldy and I know that I only want recent data files, I can go to select samples right from my variable. Or if I go back to that browsing screen, I can select samples here. So by default, I have sort of the basic file from every single year selected. If I uncheck that, I can go say, maybe I only want the last couple years, or maybe I want to compare 2010 to 2015. And I submit in order to select that. My browsing is now filtered to only those samples I selected. And I also have added them to my cart. So sort of by default, I'm starting the request process for these 4 samples right now. I can go back and adjust that at any time. But let's look at a few other variables. As you can imagine, sex variable, very straightforward, whether the person was male or female. Codes are simple. 1 is male, 2 is female. You can get, again, an unweighted case count there. This variable is pretty comparable. Universe tells you who was asked the question. Well, sex is asked of everyone. And for many of these variables, you can see the actual question as it was asked on the questionnaire. And you can even, I'll open this in a new tab, but you can even see the full text so you know the order. You can double check skip patterns for complicated variables and see the whole questionnaire right from there. So that's the documentation for sex. Let's look at something a little more complicated. Maybe we're going to take a look at differences in education by sex. So here in the education group, I have things like school attendance, educational attainment, grade level attending, degree, and then these are from historic or other samples that I haven't included here. So I'm going to look at educational attainment. The basic description says this is measured by the highest year of school or degree completed. I can see what's available and approximately how many people in the sample have responded in those categories. The higher levels here are based on obtaining a degree. So this is completion of a 2-year, completion of a 4-year, and then higher level completion. How does this compare across time? There's a lot of detail here. We've written this information about what we learned as we brought all these data files together. So you'd have to sort of filter through this, I'm sorry, to find details about your particular year. In these recent years, tends to be pretty comparable. But if there were something unique about 2015 that differed vastly from a prior year, we would explain it here. Who was asked questions about education? All people. And again, you can jump into the questionnaire text. Many of these variables have flags. If any of the missing values were imputed or other notes like that, you would find it in the flag, and you can add that to your request as well. So we're going to go back. I think we have time to take a quick look at one more variable that I would like to use on the tabulator if we have time. And that's, well, no, we'll skip work. We'll go to income. So sadly for statisticians, we don't, social science data is often categorical. So great for teaching methods that work with categorical data. We don't always have a ton of continuous variables, but in this American Community Survey, we do have some information about total income, wage income. We're going to take a look at this. And the documentation in the code section for these continuous variables is a little bit different. So what we'll tend to show you is if there's a top code or a bottom code, if there are special codes that indicate people weren't asked the question or the data are missing, those will be called out on this page. We're going to be looking at ACS. There's some notes here about how we record in groups at the high levels of income, a median, and so the highest is the 99.5th percentile in the state. But since these are our highest values, we know that all of those values are under 999, 998. So basically, if we stick with the high 900,000s, we will get the full range without including these high values in our analysis. So again, something that I think is essential in statistics, if your students are doing real-world applications, is running the frequencies, all your basic descriptives. There's some weird stuff in categorical variables. There are people who don't answer the questions who get special codes. It's absolutely essential to doing good work, and this data is great to use real-world examples to illustrate that. Okay, so those are basic variable documentation. I think we've covered a couple flavors of what the codes pages look like. I've shown you that you can read up about what we've learned about comparing across time. You can see the full questionnaire text that these variables came from. So I would like to go next to a feature. Oh no, I wouldn't like to do that. I would like to take a look at our data cart and add some more variables. So if I choose sex, maybe I want relationship to the head of the household, age, marital status. I said I wanted to take a look at education. As I check each of these, I'm adding them to my cart up here in the corner. I'm gonna go grab whether or not a person was employed. I'm gonna go get their wage income. And if I'm happy with what I have here, I start to enter the checkout system, except that when I get to the end, I don't have to pay any money for this. So I will review what I have. If I'm happy with that, maybe I don't need all these years, I can change that. I go to the final stage of the checkout. Again, I can review what I've selected. I get a note here about these being 1% samples. I have information about the variables I've chosen. By default, I will get a fixed width ASCII file along with syntax to read it into data SAS SPSS. Or I can request one of those pre-formatted file types. I can also request CSV files. By default, I'm going to get a record with full information for each individual. If I pick a stats package, the system will remember this in my profile. So it will always give me data files. It will also always give me the default fixed with all of the syntax for all of the different stats packages. If I want to select those data quality flags, I can do it here. You can subset your data and select cases. I'm not going to go into this detail today. But one thing I will jump into here is that you can customize the sample sizes. These are from the census, so they're pretty big files. You're getting 3 million plus records for each of these. If you want to work with smaller files, I think the smallest, whoops, I didn't know it jumped out like that. I think the smallest you can jump to is 10,000 households. I don't think it's 10,000 persons. No, 10,000 households per sample. And if you really just need a smaller file, maybe this will help you get partway there. As that's done, weights are adjusted accordingly, and those subsets are drawn as a systematic sample across the records. It's important to describe what you've done, and we'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to say, whoops. Good. So if I'm happy with this, I submit, and what I've done is requested, I have to log in. I will remember what I've done though. So I've now requested a pooled data file with those variables I asked for. And I already have the command files because we know those from the way the data file was requested. I will get an email when that's ready, both with this, that this data file and the ASCII file are ready, and I can download all of these. Note, our biggest user support question is how do I open the file? Because when you download the file, they are zip files. So unzip them, and then they should open just fine. I did a test demo yesterday, and that data is showing here, so this is ready to go. The data files will be available for about 72 hours, but as you can see, past requests appear here, and you can revise those. One thing we have heard from teachers is they're in love with the fact that they can build a test question based on one sample. They can go back and maybe pick a different state, pick a different year, and they'll have they can use their same syntax to generate the test question, but they'll have new answers. So that's one tip that I've gotten from teachers that they like about this system. Okay, so that's how to request a data file. Now, if there are questions about this web browsing system, I'll take those, and then we should have a couple minutes to show one or two tabulation examples.
Okay, so someone had sent me a message, I think it was just to the panelists, and it was like, you know, they do use some of this data in class already. Then there is another person it was John in the question and answer box was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And so it's really a plea to the people who are listening, not to you, but what about making you know, kind of a plea to the stat ed community to create some curricula for this. So try to work together. And so maybe you guys can connect through the chat window and you can start sharing some things. That would be one way to do it. I have a couple ideas I want to run by Julie when we get done about how we might be able to unite some of you people who are in the webinar today so that you can work together.
And I was going to make the same plea.
Yeah.
I think over the summer, as we do our own work on curriculum, we're also talking about developing a few ways to try to incentivize. They would be very tiny, but if we could get educators sort of contributing some example exercises or syllabi where we, you know, make sure that you're credited for that work, maybe even some little prizes or some collaborative efforts where we could, you know, pay a small little award fee or something. I don't know what that's going to look like, but that is on our roster this summer. So if people are interested in being notified about that, maybe I can go through you.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great. All right. Let's see. You've got about we've got about 15 minutes until 1 o'clock. Okay.
So I think there might be opportunities here when you use data for your class. You know, you could make a small file for your students. We're fine if you share that with your students. We would love if you would, maybe as a lesson in good data practice, data stewardship, data ethics, we would love if you would have those students register if they're actually going to be using the data. Of course, it's good for our numbers, but it's also an opportunity for you to say, you know, when you use data, you have a responsibility to be, you know, to be conscientious about your analytic techniques and to cite data properly and those kinds of things. But you are welcome to share files with your students and not force them to come to this system if that's too much for your classroom organization. And then perhaps, you know, you can use the data, develop your own tables, and then just share those with your students. One thing that's really handy for getting to know the data and even for making some tables for use in class is this analyze data online. Because some of the categorical data is tricky, it's best to have two screens open, you know, the browsing screen so you can see what the codes look like while you're doing the tabulator. This is an open source system developed at UC Berkeley. It's a powerful tabulation system. You could do almost all of your statistics on this system, but the learning curve would be just as great as learning a stats package. So I think it's best for tables and some basic mean comparisons. In order to prep this data, we have to load some files on here. So what's available are pooled cross-temporal sets, some basic from across all of the time periods from the US censuses, these American community surveys from 2001 to 2015 pooled, or single years or 3- and 5-year pooled data files from these American community surveys. So for this demo, again, I'm just going to jump into the most recent American Community Survey. And I get a screen that looks like this. I'm going to try to make this just a little bigger. There are a couple ways to interface with this. Once you're familiar with the data, you can kind of just type variable names into your rows and columns. At the beginning, if you're selecting data, you might want to jump down here. I've set up this sort of education by gender example. Well, I haven't set it up. That's the data we picked previously. That's what we're going to take a look at. So I can use this left-hand side to find those variables, but I don't have much metadata about them. I can't see the codes and frequencies from here. So again, a browser screen plus is the way to go on this. But I'm going to pick education. It shows up here. I can stick that in row this way. Again, if I just know my variable names, I can enter them in. I want to look at this by male, female. I'll put that in the column. And because we're talking about education completed, I think I do want to filter my analysis to an age range. So I'm going to pick age 25 to 65. I figure not everyone's done. I wasn't done with grad school by age 25, but we'll pick that anyway. And let's take a look at this table. I can give it a title, good practice, of course. That quickly, it went through those 3 million records representing 300 million people. It gives me a summary of what I loaded into this table. And by default, you can turn this color coding off, but by default, it's giving us sort of a z-score off the expected value for these different levels. If you concentrate on this college educated, you can see we have women at higher levels of education in all of these categories. Men ending at grade 12 often. So very quick table, quick way to glance at your data. You can see weighted case counts here, percentages, z-scores. So now that I know that, I could simplify this table a little bit and look at high school plus or college plus with some simple recoding. We can cover that if we have time, but I will let you know that this link here at the top for recoding variables is very good instructions about how to make recoded variables that you can then enter right into your row and column. When you make those variables, one tip is that they are case sensitive. So if you make them lowercase, whatever, you want to enter exactly that in here for the system to find the variables you made. They will stay with you through your whole session. So I think if you want to blow those away, either make a newly named variable or get out and come back in. So I wanted to take this a step further. We see that women look a little bit more educated, and I think we want to take a look at whether that pays off in income. So I could put a control here. I could put that state ICP code here, and I would get a separate table for every single state in the country. So you can make a whole slew of tables. You could present one state to the kids and then have them experiment with other states, and you'd have an answer guide right there for them. The one thing about that is that this Berkeley system doesn't make an easy way to export those tables. I'm so sorry. Right now you have to copy them and put them in a spreadsheet or something else, or take a screenshot. I don't know, but we haven't been able to work with them yet to get that created. Okay, so I would love to show you this income example because you can also compare means. You can do correlation matrices. You can even do multiple regression. But as I said, by that point, you might just want to use the stats package you're familiar with the downloaded data. But let's compare means for income. That was Inc. wage. Oh, I have it here from practicing. So I'm going to just double ensure that I'm not including those not applicables and missing values in the high 900,000 categories. And then I'm gonna still do educational categories by sex, and I'm still gonna limit by that age, and see if these women's education is paying off for them. This table, hopefully I did this right. And so here we have female earnings. If they're not well educated, on average, not earning a lot. Of course, we know some of these women might not be working. So we might want to go back and control for that, which we probably will have time to do. But even at these higher levels of education, we're seeing with 4 years of college, average male income of about 71,000, female 40, 5+ years, arguably maybe not paying off, but higher income definitely than less schooling. And maybe we want to double check. At this point, we also get a bar chart. There are some features on that definition page where you can turn the color coding off and on. You can change the chart that you're making a little bit. And again, we could run this separate table for every state and get the results by state. I'm going to go back to that basic table page and add one more restriction. I think it's a comma here. I happen to know that employment status code 1 means that they're actually working. So I think the comma works to restrict this. I did test it, but no, I don't know. So yes, I've restricted this to employed. So now we have a little more fair comparison of women who are actually working and the difference. Maybe they're working part-time, maybe they're earning less. That would be something to explore further, perhaps if there are hours worked variables, which I think there are. Okay, so a few examples of how quickly you can do some really useful things on the tabulator. You can, on that definition page, if you're trying to copy this table out and don't want the total and all of these parameters, you can limit what you're seeing so that you don't have standard errors or that you're only displaying certain aspects, how many decimal places you're showing, things like that. So again, there's a tutorial about the tabulator. There are some really good instructions here, right here in the tabulator. And those are the examples I had ready for you. The race variable, of course, yields a lot of differential sorts of outputs. There are a lot of categories to that variable, so you might have to do some recoding if you're going to use the tabulator for that. And what I'm also hoping we'll do this summer is to try to, I know as statisticians you can't become subject matter experts in everything, so one of the things we hope to be developing are a few guides about what you can expect to be highly correlated or not, where you can get some really significant and interesting differences, and perhaps in my dream world even a few common errors where you can kind of make the error in your conclusion and then go back and fix that because you forgot to look at your descriptives or something like that. So I wish those were ready for you today, but I would love to work collaboratively with anybody who's interested because we need your expertise to know what's useful in the classroom for you too. So I think that's what I have. Hopefully we can take another question or two if you have them.
Okay, all that has come in so far is just a thank you. Someone had to run off to class.
Okay.
So I can sense the enthusiasm, even though I can't see people's faces right now. Just what you showed us, it was just wonderful. Thank you so much. I can wait a second here and see if somebody jars a question, something comes up. Otherwise, I'm going to do my little closing part, so don't sign off quite yet, folks. We do want to get your input on the webinar today. So I wanted to thank you, of course, for participating in today's webinar. If you'd like to support your future AMATIC webinars, please consider becoming a member. bit.ly/joinamatic is a short way for you to get there. Oops. We are on Facebook, so check that out. We also are on Twitter. Recordings of past AMATIC webinars can be found at bit.ly/amatic-webinars. That is in my signature on all my emails. It usually takes us about a week or two to produce and upload webinars to the web, so give us a little bit of time to do that. I know Lara's got some handouts that she'd like to distribute as well online. And if you could, please take a moment to fill out our survey, and of course I forgot to grab this ahead of time, so I don't have it in the chat window. If someone could type it in there, the bit.ly/amatic57 will take you to the website. However, it is, let's see if I can find it here quickly. I somehow stopped screen sharing. That is not good. I was going to try to find that that real URL for you, so that you can, I can put that in the chat window. The bit.lys don't work in the chat window so well. Let's see, it'd help if I could spell AMATIC. That would be awesome. Unless somebody already did this for me, that would be great. No. Yeah, I can't type. That's not good. Maybe somebody did it for me. And I've lost the webinar there. Let's see, a few things did come in. Let's see, someone said thanks, which is awesome. Thank you very much. Let's see if somebody covered me in that chat window. No. Let me see if I can pull that, that bit.ly back up. I'm not doing well here. Let's see. And I'm back to the beginning of my slideshow. I'm really, really battling here. Let's see. Hopefully that's going to work. The bit.ly amatic 57. I missed a character. If somebody could put that in the chat window, that would be awesome. We do read all those surveys. That would be great if you could take just a few minutes and fill that out for Lara. All right, so people are telling you, you know, great presentation, thanks a lot. We appreciate all those thank yous that you guys put into the chat window, most certainly. Oh, thank you, Carrie. She put the survey in there, and it was the Survey Monkey one, so it goes right there. So if you can click on that inside the chat window, that would be most awesome. Great, thank you for covering me on that, Carrie. I forgot to open that. Usually I have it open and I just go and I grab it and paste it in there, but I did forget that today. Details, right? It looks like we have about another minute. I don't see any other questions coming in. Lara, all the questions in the, or the comments in the chat window, just thank you, great presentation. People are excited about this. Certainly, I mean, like I said, I can just tell from their comments. I don't have to see their faces to know, most definitely. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, I really appreciate it.